Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. As you know, I each week scour the earth to find the best of the best. And I have to say, when I hear the word like warhorse, I'm immediately drawn to it. So I wanted to introduce you to an awesome guy, Mark Boeder from Warhorse Executive Search. How are you today?
I am doing great, Dave. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for hanging out with us today for a little bit. I got to ask right away about the Warhorse piece. Where did that come from for you?
Where did that come from? Well, it goes back to 2000, I think 14 or so, maybe a couple of years before, but I was in the process of moving into working as an independent out on my own. And I met up with a gentleman who used to be a competitor of mine. We had lunch together, and I was doing recruiting. He was doing, as an independent guy, he was doing sales. So we were looking for ways to work together. And we hadn't met or talked for a number of years. And it was a May day. I remember very clearly. It was a May day, sunny out, but pretty cold. And we were walking across the parking lot after lunch. And the gentleman's name was Bob Berger. And I looked at him as we walked across, and I said, so just look at us, Bob, a couple of old war horses still doing it in this business in a big way, right? And it was like a flash of insight because I had been casting about for a name. And so that name, my logo, is part of everything that I do now. So Warhorse Talent, which is my branding and company where I do coaching for people in job search and networking, and then Warhorse Executive Search, where is the company that I do executive recruiting, and it's interesting. There were a few people that at the beginning said, "Oh, that's not a good logo. People will think you're old and everything else," and that's not what a warhorse is. A warhorse actually is not old, and a warhorse keeps on bringing it to the table. And so one of the things that a lot of people have liked that imagery and thinking about themselves, because a lot of people that I work with are 45 years of age or older.
Sure.
And they like that strong imagery that comes with it, because a lot of it for people who are out there in job search or other things, a lot of the success is going to come from the way that they think about themselves. And so I've used that very strong logo and strong notion of Warhorse as a person with real life business skills and expertise, and people buy into that. So that's where it came from.
That's awesome. So before we jump into that, I kind of want to, you passed over something real quick that I want to talk about. We like to talk about the intersection of personal growth and business growth here each week. So one of the things that I like to get people's feedback on was that transition that you said. You kind of were in corporate America, and then you transitioned into your own business. There's a lot of people that listen that want to do that, Mark, but they struggle with thinking, oh, I can't do it. I don't know what I'm doing. My idea is not good enough. Whatever head trash that people have, walk us through that, if you wouldn't mind, what your transition looked like from corporate America to whether it was an instant, oh my gosh, I have to do this on my own, or it progressed over time. How did that work for you?
Well, it's interesting because, and I'm gonna tell a little bit bigger story here. So when I talk about what I do, the type of recruiting is finding indispensable key talent for companies to help them grow, and in many cases to help a company grow exponentially. What I have found, and this is the reason that I'm going to talk about this and about myself, but also a lot of the people that I talk with all the time and are working with me, helping grow my business, there's a certain kind of person out there who they're really good at what they do. They have really, what they do, the way they think about the world, the way they think about business, it's deeply embedded kind of in their DNA. They don't have to, it's kind of like they say young kids, they don't go online. Young kids live, in an online world all the time. Well, it's in a way, it's similar. When you develop really, really good skill sets, and they become a part of your makeup, you don't have to think about it. You just do things, right? And so what happened to me a number of years ago is I went through it. I worked for a couple of different companies. And I was always a little bit feeling like I was in a straitjacket because of company structure and rules. They wouldn't allow me to do some of the things that I wanted to do that, by the way, all those companies are doing today.
Sure.
But I was, kind of at the front end of that, and they weren't ready to make those kind of changes that sometimes are hard. And so I worked for a number of recruiting companies and staffing companies. And finally, it just came to me that, to do what I do, I need to step out there on my own. And I'll tell you, it's scary. It's scary.
Sure.
But one of the things that was interesting was on a Thursday afternoon, I left the company that I was at, or I should say on a Wednesday afternoon, I left the company. We left on good terms because it was like, you guys aren't wanting to, at the beginning, we talked about what I wanted to do coming on board, and you're just not comfortable doing it. I have to leave to do that myself.
Sure.
So I did. And I went out to my networks and I put out a message, hey, as of tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., here's my company. At that time, it was called Mark Boeder Recruitment.
Sure.
By 11 o'clock that morning, I had 2 clients.
Wow.
One of those clients, they called me. One of those clients, it was on a retained basis, which means that they were paying me hourly for 20 hours per week,
Okay.
devoted to them. And so that really helped me get going. And I think part of it, when you talk about what goes through your head, is, first of all, that conviction that not only are you really good at this stuff, but that you have something that is of value to other people or other companies. And that the only way that you're really going to be able to present it in the way that you are really capable of and want to do it, you have to go out and do it on your own. One of the things that I found during this pandemic is that for a number of reasons, I connected with a whole lot of new people in a different area of the community where I am. I live in the Milwaukee area. And a lot of those people were small business people who had their own businesses. And one of the sea changes for me, as I was thinking about growing my businesses, was I was always wanting to grow the business and thinking that I had to hire people. And I never felt comfortable that, gee, if I hire Bob or Mary this month, am I going to be able to pay them next month?
Sure.
Right? Because I know I'd have enough money to pay the first month, right? But bringing somebody else on, you have to spend time training them.
Right.
You're less productive for a while you train them to do the things. And usually you're training them to do the things that you don't do well, right? Well, where the sea change came for me, and part of it was working with a coach, but also part of it was just realizing that I had relationships with all the kind of people that I needed to help me grow my business. So I've started working on a sales platform called Cultivating Sales. I have a person, her name is Susie Moon. She's absolutely great. She helped me configure, set up all the workflows and everything else that
Sure.
would have taken me months and months and months to do, but she's an expert at it, okay? There's a point to this story, by the way. So the person who's my virtual assistant, same thing. The people who did my website. So I've got all these people, and I've outsourced all these things where I don't need a person to come in 40 hours a week.
Right.
I need some really good skills, probably on an ongoing basis, but I might only need them on average over a year of 5 or 10 hours in a week at the most.
Sure.
And that's mostly at the beginning as I get things set up. So, and where I'm going with that, when I said that there's a point to this story, I started realizing that all of those people who are really good at what they do, have their own business and are running, whether it's a small business or sole proprietorship, those are all people that I call that kind of candidate that I'm always looking for, that key talent, that indispensable key talent. Every one of them, if you ask them a story, they will tell you that I left that company because there were so many things that I felt capable of doing, but I wasn't able to do there. And the only way that I could really fulfill myself was to go out on my own,
Sure.
right? So what I have done is now as a recruiter, I look for people who are that indispensable key talent and trying to find them 3 to 4 years before they decide to leave and go out on their own. And in that period of time, when I'm working for a company to try to find those people, that company will get the benefit of 3 or 4 years of that person's absolute best stuff,
Sure.
their
Sure.
secret sauce, but they have to realize that that person will probably leave in 3 or 4 years.
Right.
So when you ask about this, the mind thing that you go through, the first thing is, yeah, particularly if you have any years of experience working, you have to recognize that every professional has some areas of genius. They're not geniuses necessarily in everything, but some areas professionally, they are genius. So you think about that. Okay, how can I take that to the market? How do I characterize that? What is you use the positive polarity. I use for myself key talent GPS. And coming up with the term that you're going to use either for the name of your business or the way that you explain yourself
Sure.
is such a big part of it.
Right.
Because that then opens up your brain for everything else.
Yep.
And so the difficulty is for people to take that leap, because it is a little bit of a blind leap. And they almost always, particularly if they're old enough or not old enough, but if they're in a relationship of some kind, their spouse or significant other, is going to have a lot of doubts because they're going to be worried about money. They're going to be
Sure.
worried about, is there a business and everything.
Right.
And so one of the things you have to do is to spend time helping spouse or significant other, and also all the people that are closest to you, including family members, in-laws, siblings, people who are your social network, not just your business network, but those people to help understand what you really do, rather than just saying, oh yeah, I know Bob, he's an accountant, right?
Sure.
Rather it's, yeah, I know Bob, he's actually a CPA, really smart guy, and what he's done is develop this business, and now he provides those kind of bookkeeping and CPA services to companies who don't need to hire a CPA, but do occasionally need them.
Yeah. And
that's what you want the people to know is
Sure.
actually what you're really, really good at, what you bring to the table of an organization, either as a service provider or as an employee.
Well, and I think you brought up a great point about, I mean, I think about what you said about you're an outside the box thinker and you're in an inside the box kind of world.
Yep.
And so, part of that is you got to decide how painful that is, because we all have things in our life, in our work life, we'll call it that, aren't ideal. Maybe like for me, I make sure that somebody else does my invoicing, somebody else does my social media. I mean, the things that I'm not good at, like you said, the
Yep.
accounting, they take care of all that. But there are people that think, hey, I can do this all myself. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to this. Starting that business piece, Mark. I just for me, and I'm on the same spot as you, is you get to a point where it's like, why am I doing this when somebody else can do this better and faster and, quite frankly, cheaper, right? I mean, it's just easier to do it that way. So
well, the other thing is, if you're hiring somebody who's really smart at what they do, they find all the shortcuts. They find all the things that, hey, you could be doing this, or hey, we can connect this into your website. We can do this. And that's that other part where, not only do you and I, there are some things that we don't do well, but we don't have enough imagination to figure out how to really rock it when doing those things.
Sure.
Whereas somebody who's really good at it, they do.
Yeah. And on your LinkedIn site, I love these 4 words, are you key talent? I mean, that was really like when I was, prepping and spending time on this before our time together today, I'm like, boy, those are really like, those hit you right smack in the face. And,
Yep.
my next book I'm working on is about business blind spots. And I think about what, if somebody asks you, are you key talent? I mean, I'm assuming, Mark, that the vast majority of people are going to go, oh yeah, well, absolutely. Right. And maybe they are, maybe it's a blind spot, maybe it's ego,
Right.
what is key talent, whether you're on the talent side or the executive search side, Mark, what is key talent when you think about that? What are some things that you're looking for,
Well,
in that?
well, okay. And so first of all, this is the part of it is finding those kind of people is in the approach,
Okay.
right? Because what most companies do is, you know, they have a budget or a person leaves, but on October 1st, they have money in the budget to hire somebody. Or, in September, somebody leaves unexpectedly and they give you a 2-week notice, right?
Right.
And now, companies, they'll tell HR or whomever is at, we want the best person out there in this marketplace to do whatever it is, right? Well, and you're never
Find them in 2 weeks, right?
right. Well, see, that's the fallacy of the whole thing is
Yeah.
that the only people you might find actually somebody who's pretty good,
Sure.
but they only happen to be available now, right? In other words, they're out of a job themselves or something happened that they're interested in looking. And my whole thing about this approach is that this is a never-ending approach. Now, some large companies and the very large ones will have a talent group, right? And talent, if they're doing it right, they're generally not part of HR, right? But you have to be proactive and have a planned approach to finding people like this and starting to communicate with them maybe 2-3 years before you ever want to hire them, right? It's not a just-in-time recruiting approach, which is what most companies have been doing for about
Sure.
40 years, right?
Gotcha.
It's actually getting out there. And where all of this has come from is I've been on LinkedIn for 18 years. I'm a networker. I always have been. I've got a large network. Almost all of my candidates and all of my business opportunities come through my network.
Okay.
And I realize that is the same approach. That's the approach I've been using for years is I curate my network. In other words, the only people that I allow in my network these days I started doing 6-7 years ago, are good people who are really good at what they do, because good people who are really good at what they do have connections who are
Sure.
good at what they do. They generally aren't going to hang out with people who are nutcases or bad attitudes or whatever. If somebody's really good, and let's say they could be an accountant, it could be an IT person, it could be a banker, it could be, you name the functional area,
Sure.
kinds of people that they tend to deal with or socialize with and have in their network of friends are people who are just like them, except they might be in a different functional area.
Sure.
So I always look at, people say, how can I help you, Mark? And I say, well, all I want are introductions to great people who are great at what they do. And so I've been doing this for a long time. In the last 4 years, most of the time when a company has come to me and asked me to go find somebody, I've already met that person.
Sure.
They're in my network. It's somebody I've talked to. I'm not starting a discrete search today. I met that person 4 years ago and I stay in contact with them. So, and that's what, when I talk about what does a company need to do, they need to have an understanding, and it takes time. This is a marriage. To some extent, it is a marriage, and it's, what do we need from a skill standpoint, but more importantly, what do we need from a personality, collaboration type perspective? Are they a team player? Are they generous with what they know that they will share that information with others, right? And it's all of that kind of stuff. Well, you can't find that out
Sure.
by giving somebody some sort of personality test and interviewing them and like you said, collapsing all that into 2 or 3 weeks and expecting that you're going to have a really good answer on that.
So I think this is really solid for the business owners that are listening. I wrote down 2 weeks is too late. So if you're
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Steal it, man. Take it, right?
That's
but
right.
I mean, it's interesting because if you wait until the day that somebody says, hey, Mark, if you're the owner of the company and I go in there and I say, Mark, hey, thanks for everything. I got a better offer, whatever. It doesn't matter why, but I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice. So,
Right.
I'll be available for transition. I'll be available for whatever you need. I mean, that's like a really tough day if I'm any good.
Yep.
And if I'm not good, then you're all up and running. I shouldn't be there anyway, but
Right.
right. But I mean, I think that you're really 2 weeks too late, because this is already, you're limited to that spot. Like you said, that moment in time, you have to take a flash of your network and say, okay, right now, who is best suited for this. So it sounds like you're really settling. So I guess the message is when I owned my business, we always were recruiting. We were always looking for good talent. We hired people at times we didn't have a spot for them, but it was like,
and
man.
that's that thing. When you asked before about, somebody going out on their own,
Yeah.
it's that courage to make good business decisions that aren't necessarily the norm. Exactly what you said. Hiring somebody because they're a great person and would be a great addition to your company, not, and even if you didn't have that position budgeted for it, trying to figure, because again, these people don't come up along very often. And in most companies, aside from somebody like a Google or a Facebook or something like that,
Right.
most small to mid-sized companies, they only have one or two people like that.
Right.
But if you have that right one or two people like that, you can build a business around their capabilities. And
Absolutely.
that's the thing.
Yeah, but again, so for the entrepreneur business owner that's listening, the hard part is looking ahead, right? We're always just in time.
Yep.
We're always working in the business rather than on the business. And this really is a wake-up call. Think about the amount of talent that's out there, whether you're in a pandemic or not. I mean, a lot of people for the right, opportunity are open to movement. And so if as a business owner, we're looking down all the time and not looking up and seeing who's in our network and what opportunities there are out there, I think we miss the boat a lot in making those connections. So the companies that you work with, Mark, are you training them to be more proactive in this?
Well, so I have two ways of working, right? So first of all, many companies will come to me and they want me to recruit, right? So
Okay.
I'm going to do that recruiting, and they're going to pay me for that either on a retained basis or on a commission type basis. I actually do a combination called contained, but generally speaking, when I'm doing that, I am the exclusive recruiter for that company, so that I can use the company's name, and I'm essentially completely representing them.
Sure.
Right? The other thing that I've just started doing, and I've got a couple of clients I'm working with to start right now, is helping companies develop this whole apparatus for themselves. But they have to be thinking this is going to be a different way of doing business.
Right.
You should have either you hire a person or somebody who's already in the company, and this becomes their role. You don't take somebody in HR and have them try to become this person who is a talent, whatever title it is that somebody uses.
Sure.
But that person, that's their sole job. And particularly at the beginning, it's going to look like they're doing nothing, because what they're doing is they're just networking all the time and connecting with people and talking to people. But a lot of what you get out of it is that person is also doing a lot of indirect marketing for your company. Hey, here's who we are. Here's the kind of people that we have here. Here's the kind of people that we're looking to make relationships with. And remember, again, so maybe you target Dave Melenda, who is one of these people, key talent, somebody that you maybe would like to hire someday, but the timing doesn't work out.
Sure.
Dave Melenda probably has other people who are similar to him in capabilities, skills, mindset, and everything. And so it is a ongoing networking, connecting, and community exercise.
And it's crazy to me, Mark, how many times in my career I've connected somebody with somebody else that needed a job. I mean, when we were
That's how
doing,
I got into, that's how I got into recruiting.
that's awesome. I mean, when we used to do our Better Business Bureau monthly events, you know, one month there was a guy there, and the next month he came back and he said, "Hey, just so you guys know, I sat next to my boss. You know, I was unemployed at the time. I met with the guy, and I'm now employed there." I mean, I love connecting those dots like that. And so, you know, what an admirable thing that you do for people, because it's got to be scary, especially now, if you got downsized, if you got whatever they're calling it, you know, closed until further notice, whatever it is, laid off, whatever. It's got to be really difficult to have face that uncertainty. So
It,
do you
it,
also help? So you help the company, but
I
you
do.
also then flip around and also do help an individual like me. If I said, "Hey, Mark, you know what, I got
Yep.
downsized." So,
Yeah, and I actually do several things with regard to that. So I have a so Warhorse Executive Search is the company that's primarily focused on recruitment.
okay.
Warhorse Talent is primarily focused on candidates.
Okay.
And it's what I do there is I do job search coaching. I do group coaching where a couple of times per week. And then I'll do individual breakout calls with people. I do coaching in those groups to help them with their storytelling, to help them also, you know, what a lot of people are missing right now, particularly if they lose a job, is they don't they don't have that every day, you know, you don't think necessarily of your coworkers as your closest friends, but you see them every day for 8
Sure.
hours, right?
Yep.
Well, so now if you lose your job, you know, you don't have any of that built-in community. So part of what I do, I always talk about networking is just a means to an end. And what you're actually looking for are connections. Connections who care about you and you
Sure.
care about them,
Sure.
and you help one another. And then if that's done right, eventually that develops into community. And that's one of the things that I've had, you know, throughout this pandemic, people on my calls that, you know, in the last several weeks, a lot of people recently have gotten hired, and they are attributing it to the stuff that they've learned on those calls, but also, and every one of them, every one of them got their jobs through networking.
Awesome.
Okay. Most of these people are also 45 years of age or older. They already have experienced that, you know, the black hole of the applicant tracking system. You know, they apply on somebody's company's website. And so what I do is I spend a lot of time in that coaching about here's how you have to go about it now. It's different than it was even 3 years ago, but far different than it was, you know, 20 years ago when you
Sure.
started working at whatever company it was.
Sure.
And so, and I do that. I do individual coaching for interview coaching, as well as job search coaching. And then I do the written work, although I'm trying to move away from that and moving much more to a webinar and video-based model, and then helping people develop these skills for themselves,
Sure.
right? So that they don't have to necessarily look to someone like me. I can help with the buffing it, but you know, I'm looking for other people. And part of that is just from a scaling perspective, because I learned that when I was doing, so I've got a before and after event. So 4 years ago, I was hurt seriously in a car crash. Was running my recruiting business and my branding business under different names. The Warhorse Talent existed, but and I was going through that period of time trying to figure out how to grow, but never feeling like the right time to hire somebody. Well, for 6 months after the car crash, I was unable to drive. I was unable to keyboard. I didn't have the use of my arms. I was immediately out of business. But because of my network, they found me a job, and they
Sure.
didn't even know I was injured. They didn't even know I was hurt.
Wow.
And so, you know, a number of weeks after the car crash, I think actually 10 days after the car crash, I had surgery. 10 days after the surgery, a guy from a company called me, and he was referred by people in my network, right? They were looking for a recruiter. And I said, well, just so you know, I can't, you know, we weren't using Zoom, but I said, My
Sure.
arms, I cannot use them. I can't do any keyboarding. I am using a voice to text
Sure.
software package, learning to use it. Um, and at first they weren't interested. And then the CEO got back to me and said, hey, we'd like to meet with you. Can we come out to your house? So the next day they came out to the house. We spent about 4 hours just talking. And the long story short, I became an employee.
Wow.
But then that moment I started thinking about, okay, at some point I'm going to go back and relaunch my businesses. And how am I going to do that? Because I just learned something that if I'm doing a job that is, first of all, one-to-one, and a job that is very, very dependent on me being able to keyboard, if I lose the capability to do that, I'm all of a sudden out of business.
Sure.
So a lot of what I've been doing, and this goes back particularly into the job search coaching and network coaching, is thinking about how can I do this but one-to-many. So group coaching came part of that. How can I do this to help people with the fine tuning? So that's where videos and webinars. I haven't started those yet, but by January I'll have those up and running.
Awesome.
But that business is, to me, is actually the most satisfying in a lot of ways, because as you said earlier, people, they lose their job, particularly if they're in their 50s.
Yeah.
They're scared. They don't know, what the next thing is that's going to happen. Now with the pandemic, that's just exacerbated all of those kinds of issues.
Right.
And so, and the last thing that person was told, either directly, indirectly, or they inferred, is that they weren't good at what they did.
Right.
Because they lost their job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even if they were good, and even if they tried to make it soft for them and say, hey, the pandemic and everything, the fact is other people kept their jobs and that person lost theirs.
Right. Exactly.
So there's a period of time where the people go through some mourning. They've lost their job, they've
Sure.
lost that relationships that they've had. And so I never consider myself a therapist, but to some extent, there's a little bit of that.
Sure. Yep.
Because people need to be told that, hey, you're good at what you do.
Right.
But you know what? Maybe your skills, maybe that a job doesn't exist anymore that for what you did at, you name the company, whether it was Harley or Aurora or Johnson Controls or whatever.
Sure.
So now let's go back and talk about what are the skills that you could bring to the table of a company. Let's talk about value.
Sure.
And what companies do is they buy the way that you think.
Sure.
And that's really what any independent business person, it's kind of the same thing. There's a lot of different businesses out there because people think differently. And I think about, what tools do I have? What expertise do I have? What skills do I have that a business owner, if they've got needs, those needs are problems. What can I solve for them? I can't solve everything. And this is where I go back to that whole notion I mentioned earlier of everybody has some areas of genius. Okay.
So do you help people with that? Do you help people with that, Mark?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep. That's a lot of what I do is because it's just talking with people and helping pull that out of them. And you need to talk, and people need to practice. And it's kind of amazing where I've seen some of these people on these coaching calls, the person that they were a month or 2 months ago
Sure.
versus the person that they are today, completely different in the way that they present themselves, talk about themselves. It's really interesting. In fact, what I say to people these days is that, in the market, you're the product, but you're also the product manager. Okay. And this is the same for small businesses. I mean, small business, same thing.
Right.
Sometimes somebody's got a great idea, but it's how do I characterize this? How do I make it part of my conversations or the part of things that somebody will ask me about? And so I get people ask me, what does key talent GPS mean? What does indispensable key talent mean? What are these? And so that's part of it is coming up with those ideas that are all about you, that either you get a chance to talk about or people are going to ask you about.
So if you're in the situation, so I kind of want to hone in on that scary interview day, I mean, I've been, I can say I haven't probably interviewed in 25, 30 years. I don't even know what it was, right? But I've interviewed people on a pretty regular basis. And so I'm curious on your end, you know, what are some tips that you share with the people that are going in for the interview? Let's say I'm, you know, use Harley as your example. You know, I want to, you know, I have a VP role there, whatever. I have an interest there. They have an interest in me. So we set up this interview. You know, what are some tips for me that you could give me that you feel comfortable sharing for that day of the interview?
Okay, so the first thing is, particularly if it's upper level type positions, whether that's VP or whether it's a director or a lead or a product manager or sales or marketing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what is the first question that many people will ask a candidate, Dave? You probably, you know, if you were the hiring manager, what is the first question you might ask me if you don't know much about me?
You know, it's tell me about yourself, right? That's how I
Exactly.
would do it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the problem with that question is, from a candidate standpoint, it's so nebulous.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Right.
Right. And so
Yeah.
what I coach the first thing with candidates, I always say to people, it's all about the questions, not your answers.
Sure.
Right. Because I can tell a lot more about a person, their intellect and their level of knowledge by the questions that they ask about whatever it is. And so one of the things that I recommend to people, and this is kind of this, I got this working as a sales guy for years. It's a variation of the same question. I say, hey, you know what? I'll tell you everything that you would ever want to know about me, professionally, personally, probably more than you'd want to know. But I'll tell you what, Dave. Could you tell me in your own words? I've read this job description. It's a great one, but could you tell me in your own words, what are the 4 things that you need me to do to knock out of the park right from day one through the first 6 months that I'm hired here? And the reason I'm asking you to tell me that in your own words is because then I will answer that question of tell me about yourself, but in context
Sure.
to your needs.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, and I could imagine right there, Mark, where the average hiring manager, because they're probably, this is more like an interruption in their day.
Yep.
No offense to anybody that does it. I mean, it's just part of your day, right?
Right.
And so when somebody asks a question that is like pattern interrupt, I call it, where you're not actually on script, where somebody says, hey, I'll be happy to answer that, but you know, I got a question back for you. You know, that's got to be like, I wouldn't even, you know, I could see people not even understanding how to answer those. What 4 things do you need from me? Boy, I don't know. I'm the one asking the questions here.
Well, see,
Right?
and that's, but see, that's the problem is that, you know, so many times a job description is spit out by the software program that HR uses, that
Sure.
most of it's a template, right? And also, here's another thing about job descriptions. They are obsolete the moment they're written because, you know, let's say that the job has been out there open for a month, they're looking for people. Well, every person that they talk to that is not a fit, they realize, oh, you know, we should have asked this or we should have had this, but they never change the job description, right? So they're still operating off of that same job description,
Okay.
and their needs might have changed. And so that's why I'm always saying what you want to do is the hiring manager is like a customer or whatever. They have to have a need, they have to have budget and authority. HR never has either of those 3 things unless they're hiring their own people, right?
Sure.
And so, you know, that's why it's so important to try to get as direct contact right from the get-go to the hiring manager, because that's where you find out what are the problems that they have that need to be solved. Because you know what, sir, I know that you have a bunch of problems sitting on your desk. You probably have 10 of them here. I want to take responsibility, but not only responsibility, accountability for 1 or 2 of those piles.
Sure.
So tell me what those problems are that I can help address.
Gotcha.
And that's really that. And again, what you're doing is you are getting off script. You're turning what was an interview, a structured conversation, you're turning it into a business conversation.
Sure.
A business conversation is 2 ways.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and I've coached people just for fun on helping them with their interviewing skills, just purely based on the fact that I've probably interviewed hundreds of people in my time. And I've always tried to get them to get off script. I've tried to get them to realize that they're interviewing you, but you also are interviewing that person.
absolutely,
So,
you're interviewing that company.
yep.
You're interviewing, and this is again comes back to that whole thing I talked about conviction earlier in someone's skills and capabilities. My belief is today that really good talent out there who are going to remember, many times they don't need a job, they're working, right? And so, and I tell them is that you need to be interviewing this company, and the company has to, you are the one who holds the bar. They
Sure.
have to reach the bar,
Right. Yep.
right? It's not just, you hoping and praying that they might hire you, but you have to look at it as this is a business prospect. If I go there and I'm there for 3 or 4 years, I want to make sure that it's a good fit.
Sure.
They get something out of it. I get something out of it, right? But that's the thing. It's more than just that job, particularly for the people who are that indispensable key talent that I talked about.
Well, and I think that as somebody that's hired people and still do hire people for my clients now, it's pretty easy to smell desperation. It's pretty easy to smell when things are going in a positive direction versus when they're not.
Right.
So, I mean, authenticity has got to be a real key component of an interview. And I would rather hear the wrong answer than the right answer that ends up being wrong, because I mean, I've had it where I interview a guy named Joe, whatever, and then all of a sudden 6 weeks into it, I'm like, Joe, where did you interview, or was that your brother John? Because, what you told me at the interview is nowhere close to what's actually going on here. So,
and I call that John's representative. John's representative is just a little shinier, a little nicer, smiles a little bit more. They dress a little bit nicer. They're more polite, right?
Yep.
And this is again one of those reasons why you either use somebody like me who does this connecting full-time basis and develops relationships with people over the long term, or your company, you have someone doing that, because exactly that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to find out 90 days later that the person's a jerk, or that the person, really doesn't have the capabilities because they had practiced all the answers they thought they would get. That's why I say you can tell more about a candidate by the questions that they ask. Because first of all, if I ask you a question and then you say something, now our conversation is going to take a different direction that I can't have a rote answer for. Whereas, somebody can do all that practice. That's not what I do. When I prep candidates for interviews, I'm not holding the ladder for them. I'm letting them know, hey, here's a company, here's what's going to be important. Here's the kind of conversation that you want to have, but I don't give them the answers, because that's not what I do. That would be conflict of interest.
Sure. Yeah. So let's flip it around real quick, Mark, as we start to come in for a landing. I look at the interview questions from the person doing the interview. We'll call it the business owner or whatever, the business person, that's doing that. What are some solid interview questions that you suggest your clients, ask? Because obviously, tell me about yourself is a no-no. What are some better things?
Well, here's a series of 3 questions that they're related, but tell me about a time professionally when you lost or failed.
Okay.
And then, and here's the feel question. How did that make you feel?
Sure. Yep.
And then how did you respond in both the short term and in the long term?
Gotcha.
Right. And I think, it kind of, what happens at that point is if you ask that kind of question, for a few moments, you're going to lose contact with that candidate, because that candidate is going to go back into their memory. Right. And they're going to be thinking of a painful time because they lost or failed. Now they could take that however they want to do that. It could be losing a job. It could be losing out on a promotion. It could be losing out on something else, or that they failed in some attempt, at work.
Right.
But they're going to look inward for a few moments to think about that, and you will really see some emotion. And the answers, there will be emotion behind them.
Right.
And when I say that, what you always really want to get are people, I always talk about the difference between, the big thing about inspiration versus simply somebody who can make you do something because they're a boss.
Right.
Inspiring somebody is different, and that's a different kind of emotion.
Right.
And what you want to do is you want to find out, how do these people react emotionally to this kind of situation, but also how would they react right now? Because if I go back and suddenly there's a little bit of monster that comes out, right? You're getting that answer because you got them to go inside.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's not necessarily bad, but I just said it allows you to get at something that's deeper than simply that surface question of, gee, have you ever lost?
Yeah, and that's a great, and so I try and talk to people about an iceberg, and that, the piece above the water is the little piece, the bigger piece is down below, and that's really what we want to get to, is that bigger piece, to your point, how'd that make you feel? Those are emotional questions. And so my suggestion is always, when you ask that type of question, be prepared for some silence. Be prepared to not rescue, and be prepared to not restate the question, but do it in multiple choice. Right. And I know in my listening skills training and in my questioning techniques, we talk a lot about that, because I could say, hey, Mark, how'd that make you feel? And if you don't say anything right away, I'd be like, hey, Mark, how'd that make you feel? Did you feel? And then I kind of fill in these blanks. So I really try to encourage people in their listening skills. If you're interviewing somebody, 10 seconds of silence is like painful between people, right? But oddly enough, 10 seconds of silence between you and your spouse, or you and your best friend, you and your kid, it's nothing, right? So I try and encourage people in that and coach them along to say, silence is okay.
Right. I think what you're getting at too, and this is the other part of it. We always talk about the high emotional IQ and all that type of thing, but and that hiring managers are looking for that. But the hiring manager also has to exhibit that.
Correct.
And one of the things that they have to do, the best bosses are people who allow the people who work for them to be vulnerable, to tell them about weaknesses. Now, and I only had, in all my work experience, I had only 2 bosses like that, where I felt like I could be vulnerable. So many times I was in sales or recruiting positions or whatever, where I felt that I did not feel comfortable at all.
Yeah.
Sharing that. And that's that thing where you have to help the people.
Right.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering, how did you feel with this? Did you feel with that? Whatever. You help them. You want them to also understand that one of the things, that if they come to work for you, that you can be vulnerable. Right. It's okay to make mistakes, because we all do. Yeah. We're not going to fire you because you, now, again, depends on the type of mistake, but generally speaking, we're not going to fire somebody. Some companies would. Right.
Well, and if you don't feel safe in that interview, you're not going to say anything.
Right.
And that's the problem, is without that safety, then we're creating, kind of fictitious answers. We're not really getting to that point. And to your point, the EQ, the emotional quotient, our emotional intelligence, we do a ton of work with DISC and EQ on assessments, because I've learned over the years to combat the fact of, you tell me anything you want, Mark, I got to believe it. If I got 50 pages in front of me on an assessment, it's pretty hard to, to skate on that system. But the higher the emotional intelligence, the more you make, the more that you are able to advance your career. There's so many upsides to that. But people kind of hear the word emotion and they get kind of nervous. It's like, oh, we're going to, start a fire and pull out a guitar and start singing Kumbaya. And, that obviously, derails some people. So I appreciate that, that safety is what we're going for. And so, you know, in those questions, you can't ask, it's hard. I would think it'd be hard to ask those questions like right away without a little bit of trust and safety built up
Right.
first.
And that's those three questions. Yeah, you've got to, that can't be the right out of the chute. And that
Yeah,
also is not, those are not questions for a phone interview,
sure. Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
Now, granted, some interviews are not going to take place face to face, but you could do it in a Zoom, in a virtual interview where
Sure.
you're looking at the person and
Sure.
everything.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's the appropriateness and appropriate time. And, and it's many times they say, well, tell me about a time when this, that, or the other thing, and I just say, hey, tell me about when you lost.
Yeah.
Tell me about, because that sucks. It sucks
Right.
for everybody,
Sure.
right? Or if you fail, how did you process that? How did you deal with it short term? How did you deal with it long term? You know,
Yep.
were you set up to fail, or did you feel like you were? And that's the thing. I mean, sometimes companies or bosses do that.
Yeah.
Is if they feel like somebody might be a threat to their position, they set them up to fail,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And person's got to be careful about how they talk about that, because they don't want to be pointing fingers at the other person. But
Yeah.
you want to get that idea of, how did that make you feel? I mean, it sucks, I know that.
Yeah. And it's always funny when you ask somebody one of their weaknesses or one of their shortcomings or whatever, I care too much, I work
Right, I
too
know.
much.
They have all the practiced answers that,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was, I'll never forget trying to, I just come to the realization that I'm really good at the front end of something. I'm really good at selling something. I'm not so good at delivering it on the back end. So what I've had to do is build people around me that works. And I'll never forget Linnea Katz-Pettit did it. It was awesome. She said, I'm involved in the front 10% and then the back 10% as a business owner, and that middle 80% I delegate to other people. And I'm like, man, that's brilliant.
Yep.
I wish that I would have known that years ago, because I always wanted to kind of run it all the way through myself, and then you can see where people's weaknesses are. So
Right.
from an interview perspective, just be authentic. Again, if you're not good at something, it's going to get found out. I mean,
Right.
You might as well be proactive, be professional about it, and share it up front so that, it's out there. It's kind of like a first date, right? Boy, like you said, you're prim and proper and everything is just
that representative.
exactly right. It's so perfect. And then as it goes, then it's like, it kind of changes. So I want to plug a couple things before we go for you. So congratulations on Brilliant Breakthroughs for Small Businesses. You are a #1 Amazon best-selling author. So I haven't seen you at the meetings yet, so hopefully we'll see you there shortly. But you just released in October, in November, so
Right, just a week ago.
Veterans Day. So congratulations on that. And what's your chapter about?
Well, my chapter is about exactly what we're talking about here. It's up-leveling your business with indispensable key talent, rather than those people that you've always come to think of as irreplaceable workers.
Okay.
Because many times irreplaceable workers, are fine if you're a company of a $2 million company. But if you're wanting to become a $25 million company, maybe some of those people are replaceable, because you have to have people where it's not too big for them. The stage is not too big.
Awesome.
And so, and a lot of it, I talk about this approach. And it's, like I said, this chapter is essentially going to be the first chapter in a book about the same subject area of finding indispensable key talent, building an apparatus for it within your company, or finding those people utilizing somebody like me. But it's a different approach. It's completely different than most companies use for doing their hiring or anything. I've been doing it for a number of years. And like I said, a number of things all kind of coalesced in the last 3 or 4 years after the car crash, but then also since January, about the direction of my business and how I was going to go about it. And I decided just, hey, you know what? What I've been doing has been working really, really well. Why don't I just train companies on how to do that?
Sure. Awesome.
So yeah.
Perfect. And then you're going to parlay that into a podcast as well?
Podcast is going to start in December called Warhorse Executives, and that's
Awesome.
going to be part of it is talking about talent, where you find them, how you find them. Part of it is talking about talent. Part of it is, I'm going to invite you on because you have, you also happen to, you're in a slightly different area than I am,
Yes.
but it's that whole thing of, how do you assess talent and how do you do it with tools, but how do you also assess, using street smarts, talking to
Right.
people and
Yeah.
conversation. And so that's a lot of where this is going to go, is at podcasts and helping professionals, whether they be candidates or hiring managers or HR people,
Sure.
providing that kind of knowledge. Right.
Awesome. We're good. We're looking forward to that coming out, and your brilliant breakthroughs is on Amazon, correct?
It's on Amazon. It's out there. I
That's
think
awesome.
still for a couple more days, 99 cents if you buy the ebook. We are going to be, the books also, the new ones that they're going to be printing, both the soft back or the paperback as well as the hardback.
Yeah.
We will be getting a slightly different cover that will has the International Bestseller badge on them. So,
Nice.
which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's way cool. Congrats.
Thank
So
you.
one last question, Mark, and I'm going to let you go. What's one thing that most people listening don't know about you that you feel comfortable sharing?
Well, and I'm going to do a podcast, or I should say not a podcast, but a video for my blog about this. So 4 years ago, I was in that car crash and the injuries were bad. I had by far the worst injuries. I was in the back seat.
Mm.
However, for 3.5 days, we were driving around northern Wisconsin doing some scouting for deer hunting and everything. I was sitting in the same seat for those 3.5 days. And about an hour before the car crash, going off the road, hitting trees, I decided to change seats.
Mm.
That saved my life.
Wow.
And since that time, that was kind of my rebirth. And so I'm a very different person today than I was 4 years ago. I'm still not 100% sure what's out there for me.
Sure.
Sometimes people say, well, saving you for something. So, a lot of what I do is more give back to the community these days. And I think that's the thing, is that I came pretty close to dying, and gives you a real different perspective for just about everything.
Absolutely. Wow. That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Mark, if somebody wants to learn more about Warhorse Executive Search, or they want to learn more about Warhorse Talent, or they want to just chat with you, what's the best way for people to connect?
Best way, one of two ways, is you can go to the website warhorseexecutivesearch.com, and that's warhorseexecutive.com. So
Okay.
warhorseexecutivesearch.com.
Okay.
Or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is always a great place. You go out, Mark Boeder. I've got I'm pretty prolific out there. I've been on it, like I said, for 18 years. But if anybody wants to connect up with me, and then what I do is I set up appointments and things like that, and we can talk about whether I'm helping your company set up in a consulting capacity, whether I help your company set up this type of apparatus, whether I do recruiting for your company,
Sure.
or whether or not you're a candidate, or also, what I've been doing for candidates for a long time, I've started doing with a lot of small businesses, just that whole notion of connecting.
Gotcha.
I
Sure.
do it. I'm connected now to hundreds of small businesses as well as large businesses. And so I do a lot of connecting people to people, because everybody's looking for clients.
Absolutely. Awesome.
And so it's sharing information that helps make that great connection.
And we found each other on LinkedIn. And so, yeah, LinkedIn is a great
Right.
spot to be. So, Mark, thank you so much for sharing this. I'm excited to see what this is going to do for people that are either looking for a job, companies that are looking for talent, that have done it the same way forever and are looking to try and do something new If that's either case, that's you, consider calling Mark, connecting with him, just, at least to understand there's a different alternative. So there, if you're frustrated and struggling with the way that it's been going, there is opportunity maybe here to try something new. So Mark, I appreciate you hanging out. Can't wait to get that podcast up and running. I'm excited to watch that go, and hopefully soon we'll be able to network in person again.
Absolutely.
And get into, Zoom's fun, but it's a lot more fun to shake a man's hand. So,
Yeah.
so
All right. Well, hey, and Dave,
Yeah.
I thank you so much. This is great. Your organization is great. I've been to your presentations before, and I feel like you've got a lot really to offer to small businesses to help them grow.
Well,
And
thank you.
that's I think the whole thing is, helping companies grow. We do what we do to help other companies grow, and you do a great job of it.
Awesome. Well,
So-
thank you. Thanks for the kind words. And yeah, that's why I wrote Growing on Purpose, because I run into so many people that grow by mistake, and I want people to grow on purpose. And your tools, my tools, everybody's tools, if you put them into play, will get you moving forward in your career. So thanks, Mark. And again, look forward to soon we'll be back out networking in person. And again, keep us posted on your podcast.
I will do that. Thanks
All right.
again. And thank you for anybody who listens or watches. And hey, be great today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.